Good morning, everybody. My name is Ceri Evans. I'm part of the Institute here at Bangor University. My role in the project really is that I'm leading on the tender review service element of the winning and tendering programme. I have a lot of experience in tendering, both from the supplier perspective and also from the procurer perspective, and I know how frustrating tendering can be, and particularly so when sometimes you don't get a reward for all the hard work that you can put into it. And that's what I like about this particular element of the programme, is it's there to help you, and it's there, I suppose, to minimise the pain barrier for you in tendering and make your lives a little bit easier, hopefully. So what am I going to cover today? We're going to look at what the tender review service is, what can it do for you, what are the benefits for you in terms of being involved with this work package. Going to look at some of the typical content areas that we would cover when we undertake a review, just to give you a more practical flavour of what we're doing. Look at some of the principles that we as a service provider would provide to you in terms of perhaps our promises. We'll look at who the service is for, as opposed to who it's not for, and it's not targeted at everybody. And we'll look at the process in terms of being engaged in the service itself, and it really is quite a simple process. And we'll finish off by looking at some of the benefits, if you like, of being involved in the work package. So what can the service do for you? Quite simply, it's there to help you learn important lessons from previous pre-qualification questionnaires, which is the first stage of tendering, or from your tender submissions themselves. And what we do is we request that you provide a recent PQQ or a recent tender that you've submitted, alongside all the corresponding procurer's documentation and any feedback that you might have received. And we then go ahead and we undertake a review of that tender submission in comparison to the procurer's documentation. We communicate the outcomes of that review via a bespoke PQQ or tender review report. Now, what will that report do for you? It will advise you how each element of your response could have been improved. We'll look at whether you could have included additional content, whether you needed to provide more detail, more evidence and so on, or whether you just needed to communicate things perhaps in a slightly different way. One of the other major purposes of the work package is to help you see things through the procurer's eyes. What is the procurer actually seeing when they're evaluating your tender? And that's a key part of this work package. We will help you understand fully what the procurer's questions are about. Sometimes, as we know, procurer's questions aren't perhaps as clear as they could be, and we'll try and get behind perhaps the procurement speak and communicate that in layman's terms. One of the things that's come back to us as well from the reviews we've done to date is that SMEs do not know at what level to pitch bids at. What level of detail do they need to provide? What level of evidence do they need to provide? How do they need to present it, and how do they need to structure it? And that's another area that we will help you with. We will furnish you with a variety of tendering templates, and the purpose of those templates is to make your lives a little bit easier, to enable you to tender in a more efficient and perhaps more effective way. And in terms of example of these templates, there'll be templates perhaps based on your experience. What different elements of your experience do you need to communicate in your tender? What different areas of your expertise do you need to communicate in your tender? It's almost a checklist of the sort of things that you need to make sure you cover. Another thing we found in doing the reviews to date is that suppliers aren't always sure how best to structure their responses. Procurer's documentation comes in all shapes and sizes, so it makes it very difficult sometimes for you to structure things in the best ways, and we will give you advice on that area. Another important aspect is to identify your tendering strengths. What are you doing right? So what do you need to continue to do in future? And I'm sure there's a whole host of other things that we'll cover as part of that review if we undertake one. What sort of content does the service cover? As I mentioned earlier, we look at your expertise and we look at your experience. Are you communicating that expertise and experience in the right way? Are you tailoring it to the specific needs of the contract? Are you selling the benefits of your experience and your expertise so that you actually differentiate your offering from perhaps your competitor's offering? Another element that you have to tackle within your tenders is how are you going to go about delivering the work that is the subject of the tender? What sort of things do you need to include, do you need to incorporate within your methodology statement or your proposed approach? And we will help you understand the sort of areas that you need to cover. Timescales is one, and breaking down work into sort of manageable chunks, Gantt charts. Management deliverables is another massive area that procurers want to know about. How are you going to manage that contract, and how can you incorporate that within your methodology statement? Risk management, massive area for procurers. At the end of the day, they want to know what are the risks. They want to know whether you understand what the risks are inherent in that contract, and that you've put in place sufficient mitigation measures to ensure that you can deliver that contract, and you can reassure them that you can deliver that contract as they want you to deliver it. So there will be different elements that we'd look at the PQQ stage, perhaps in comparison to the tender stage, and at the tender stage we'd look more at, obviously, at sort of project level risks. Contract management, again, a massive area. What we're finding in the reviews that we've done to date is that suppliers are not communicating well enough how they're going to manage that contract to reassure that the contract can be delivered according to the budget, according to the timescales, and according to the quality expectations of the customer, and the customer being the public sector organisation. So again, it's going back to the sort of management deliverables, if you like, communicating with the procurer to ensure that that procurer is sure that you're going to deliver that contract, and provide them with timely advice as to where and how advanced you are in terms of delivering that contract. And again, it comes back to things like management deliverables and so on. Supply chain is another area which may be relevant to some of you, it might not be relevant to all of you. But again, how are you going about choosing suppliers in the first place? How are you selecting those suppliers? How are you appraising those suppliers in the first instance in terms of perhaps their competence, their capacity, their cost issues, compliance with environmental criteria and so on? All the sort of issues that the procurer themselves are actually trying to assess you for. You need to demonstrate that you are doing exactly the same thing for your supply chain. Not only selecting those suppliers in the first instance, but also managing those suppliers throughout the process, if you like. Again, how are you appraising those suppliers? How are you ensuring that they're delivering what they should be delivering so that you can deliver to the quality expectations of the customer? Are you setting up KPIs, key performance indicators and so on, to ensure they are delivering what they should be so that the quality can be delivered? For some of you, subcontractor issues may be more pertinent to you, and that's another massive risk area from the procurer point of view. You need to reassure them that you're managing your subcontractors properly, that you have an existing relationship with them ideally, and that they are going to deliver for you, aka that you are going to deliver for the procurer ultimately. And there may be anything else within your tender or PQQ. If it's in there, we think it's relevant to the contract and your business needs, we will do our best to cover that as well. What about our principles, our promises to you as a service provider? First and foremost, it's a free service, you'll be pleased to hear. It's an impartial service. When we undertake a review, our unique selling proposition, if you like, is that we are not involved in that tender process at all. Not as a supplier, not as a procurer. We are a neutral third party, and we will give you a very honest review based on what we identify. And that review, as Dermot sort of alluded to earlier, it pulls no punches. We will tell you exactly what we think. And for us, as much as anything, the benefits are there, as much for the procurers as the suppliers, because we're finding the suppliers are convinced sometimes that their tenders or their PQQs are up to the mark, but we're finding they're not. And we need to point that out, and there's no point in us not pointing out these issues. It's not generic training, it's not general training. It is a bespoke service, it's a personal service, and that is a key advantage of this process. We provide constructive and supportive advice and guidance, and that's our major purpose. We are thorough. For those of you involved in tendering, you need to be thorough if you're putting a tender together, and we will adopt those principles when we undertake a review for you. The review is communicated in plain English. We need to communicate in a speak that isn't procurer speak. It is in layman's terms, and that's another part of our key offerings to you. We are also totally confidential. The only people who will see the reviews will be you yourselves and members of the winning and tendering team. So who is the service targeted at? I'll make it very clear, it's not targeted at everybody. It's really targeted at those organisations perhaps who have good products and services. You know you can deliver as a company, but perhaps you're not quite so good at tendering, you're not so competent at tendering or experienced at tendering, and you're not really understanding where you're going wrong, and that's where we can come in and help you. Winning public sector trade will need to be a key part of your growth or your sustainability strategy. You will need to be a member of one of two groups. You will either need to be relatively new to tendering, and you can use the service to help you leapfrog forward in tendering to avoid perhaps the pain barrier that some others of you in the room might have experienced to date with tendering. The other group we'll target at is those who perhaps are more experienced at tendering, but they still have a relatively poor track record. They are disappointed with their track record. They're keen to improve, and they want to use us to improve. You may, for example, receive some of the very good general training from the Supplier Development Service, but you're actually struggling to apply and put that training into practice, and that's where we can come in again and do a review and work in partnership with the Supplier Development Service to help you move forward. The service, as Dermot sort of talked about earlier, that the Winning and Tendering project is only delivered to the Interreg area. Interreg is our funding provider. In terms of North Wales-based companies, we cover the whole of North Wales. We cover Anglesey, Gwynedd, Conwy, Denbighshire, Flintshire, Wrexham, the lot. We also cover a lot of South Wales as well, Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion, Swansea, and so on. So the red areas in the map there are the areas that we cover, and I think, I'm going to correct me if I'm wrong, I think Flintshire and Wrexham are actually missing from that map, so we'll have to address that. My geography is obviously not quite as good as I'd hoped.
Get back to your office immediately.
Yeah, exactly. Who is the service not for? I say it's not for everyone. If you've got a really good track record in tendering, you're obviously doing something right, so don't even bother contacting us because it's really not for you. If you don't seek feedback from the procurers, in my view, you're not helping yourselves. So quite simply, we're not willing to do a review for you. Get out there, take advantage of the feedback that you can get, because it can be really, really good. What's the service for? It's for you. It's to actually help you in tendering. Just to make it clear, it's not to actually enable you to attempt to challenge the decisions of procurers. I'll make that very, very clear. In terms of participating in the process, you will need to fill out a short application form. That application form will take you no more than 5 minutes to complete. General business information about your company. There is a very, very basic eligibility check in there. Things like, what is your tendering success rate? How many tenders have you submitted to date? Why do you want to take advantage of the service? We want them to be genuine reasons. So that, in a nutshell, that's what the application form does. We will then get back to you and we will confirm eligibility or not, as the case may be, and we will request that you supply us with a recent tender or PQQ. It needs to be recent because it needs to be relevant and it needs to be at the forefront of your minds. You will also need to send us, in its entirety, I'll make that clear, the procurer's documentation and any feedback that you might have received. We will then check the documentation. Becky over there has done a great job in managing all the administration of the service. And we will then come back to you. Obviously, establishing personal contact is absolutely vital. And part of that process is to get to know you, to get to know your business, and to clarify the expectations of what the service will do versus what it won't do. And for example, we don't cover things like price. We're not expert on sort of price elements in particular industry sectors. You are, we're not, so we won't go anywhere near that. Part of that chat is also to understand your tendering experiences to date. What's the point in that? It gives us some context. It gives us some context so that we undertake a review for you that is fit for purpose. And it may be the case, sometimes we chat to organisations and they come to us and say, look, there's particular elements where we need help with, and we will then tailor our report to fit your needs. We will then go away, we will beaver away as a team, and we will undertake that review for you. And to make it absolutely clear, it's not just one individual who'll work on that, there's a team of 3 of us, and we will separately go away and we will review that tender or that PQQ. We will then come together as a team and we will discuss the issues we've identified. So, for example, Pedro has a background in procurement law. He's involved. Gary's involved. Sometimes he's got a background in business and so on. And Dermot's involved in the quality checking and so on. And we go ahead and we produce that review for you. Our aim is to get that review back to you within 2 weeks. That's our promise to you. It doesn't always work like that. If there's a large demand for the service, we struggle, and sometimes we have to give up our holidays. Dermot's not one for allowing us to get our full complement of holidays, unfortunately. It's just the way it is, and I need to live with it. That's right. We will then send that review to you. We will then give you a chance to digest that review. We will give you typically 2 weeks to take on board the lessons that we've communicated to you. And as I say, it can sound quite patronising when I use the word lessons, but at the end of the day, it's there to help, and that's all we're trying to do. We will then contact you again, and we will have a chat to you, and it gives you an opportunity for you to ask any questions you might have about the review. As I say, we try and make it as clear as possible, but sometimes there's things that people want a bit more sort of insight into, and we're there to help you there. It also gives you a chance to get revenge and come back to us and tell us, guys, perhaps you need to improve in this area and that area and so on. So there's a sort of feedback process both ways, and we can move forward. And we'll come back to you again within a year's time to see if your tendering behaviours, if you like, and your tendering results have changed for the better. And that's the holy grail, I suppose, of this process. So, why take advantage of the service? I've said it before, I'll say it again. It provides the perfect platform to win future public sector business. We've got examples already of companies that have had atrocious track records, but they're improving, and that's very heartening for us as a team here. In terms of next steps, quite simple, get in touch. My email address is on the slide there, my phone number's on the slide. As I say, we want to help you, we've got genuine motives in place. Feedback from the service to date. We've had fantastic feedback. I'm not one to boast. People who know me know that I'm not one to boast, but it's fantastic. We always ask the suppliers, how do they rate the usefulness of the service? And it's on a scale of 1 to 5, and at this stage we've had nothing less than a 5, which is great. I'm sure it won't always be like that, but we set ourselves high standards, and we want to keep those high standards, and we will do our best for you. Not only are we getting good feedback from the suppliers, it's equally heartening that we're getting good feedback from the procurers as well. So we're getting it from both sides, and the circle is sort of complete. Have a read of those comments on the slide there, because it just gives you a flavour of the sort of things that we can do for you, and the impact, if you like, of what we're doing. And that's about it from me. Thank you very much for listening, and hopefully that was some use to you, and hopefully some of you will take advantage of the service and do get in touch either afterwards or by email or whatever if you are interested. Thank you very much.